About 3 years ago, around the time Persona 5 Royal came out in Japan, I made a video where I talked about some of Atlus's anti-consumer practices with their releases, mostly with their Day 1 DLC. Now, while the DLC we got with Persona 5 Royal was pretty egregious, and they most certainly have been doing some pretty anti-consumer things since then, it hasn't really been on the same level as that. Because they haven't been as bad since then, I didn't think it was necessary to make a video, but with the recent announcement for Soul Hackers 2 and its Day 1 DLC, I think it's time I made another one. Now, Soul Hackers 2 is a game that a lot of fans seem to have mixed opinions on, but I personally am very excited for it. I mean, we're getting a sequel to one of the most underrated Megami Tensei games almost a quarter of a century later. What's not to love? Well, $40 worth of Day 1 DLC is one thing. I mean, let's see what we're getting with this DLC bundle. We got the Booster Item Pack, which makes money and EXP drops more frequent. Okay. Costume and BGM Pack, which includes costumes like the Soul Hackers 1 and Persona 5 costumes. That's kinda cool, I guess, but why can't this be in the base game? Oh, but wait. Bonus story arc, The Lost Numbers. Okay, so part of the game's story is now being locked behind DLC. That is some bullcrap. And there's also a bonus demon DLC pack that, according to Steam, contains demons like Masakato and Mara. You know, it's one thing to take content from the game and lock it behind a paywall from the very beginning, but $40? That's 2/3 the price of the base game. You're basically telling me that if you want the complete package from Day 1, you have to cough up $100, which is ridiculous. It's bad enough that the collector's edition was super limited in stock and itself cost $200, which is much more than Atlus's previous collector's editions, but Shin Megami Tensei 5 also had its fair share of crummy Day 1 DLC in a bundle that cost $27. In this bundle, you get Mephisto, Cleopatra, and Artemis as both boss battles and demons, the return of the True Demon DLC, which includes the Nocturne Fiends and Demi-Fiend, and the Mitama DLC, which makes Mitama spawn much more frequently. And in the case of the Mitama DLC, I actually think it makes the game worse, because Mitamas are demons that give you a lot of money, EXP, or glory points. And they do spawn in the base game, they're just rare. When they're spawning all over the place, not only does it make the game unnecessarily easy, but there's no way to tell whether or not they're spawning because of the DLC, which is much more inconvenient than in other games that have places that you can just visit when you need to grind. Now, like I said, this isn't as bad as what they're doing with Soul Hackers 2, but it's still pretty bad, especially when, you know, had this released 10 to 15 years ago, it probably would have just been included in the base game. And let's not forget about Atlus's other mainline release last year, Nocturne HD Remaster. While I think this is the definitive version of this game and this re-release was both welcome and necessary, Atlus did not do a good job with its release. When it came out in Japan, the ability to select skills when fusing demons was completely absent. That had to be patched in later, and there were also some massive performance issues on the console versions. But I think the real kicker is that it launched for $50. Yeah, $50 for an almost 20-year-old game. I get that it is a remaster, but most remasters of games this old don't launch for anywhere near this much. Oh, and this has Day 1 DLC too. Yeah, for $25, you get the SMT background music pack, which only changes the music that plays when you're in the Vortex world, the obligatory money and EXP grinding DLC, and the ability to play with Dante. The only one that I can maybe defend is the Dante DLC because of licensing fees and whatnot, but $10? Looks and dialogue aside, Dante is completely identical to Raito, so you're basically paying $10 for a glorified reskin. Oh, and I almost forgot about Strikers, a game that we not only had to wait a year to see released in English, but launched with its fair share of Day 1 DLC too. Granted, it was nowhere near as bad as Royal or any of these other games I've talked about, but still, for $5 you get a bunch of items and skills that you're probably not going to need, and for $10 you get the ability to change some of the music, which is cool, but $10 still feels like way too much, and the other DLC doesn't even need to be there at all. Now, like I said, none of this is anywhere near as bad as what they were doing around the late 2010s, like what they did with the Dancer games, where, you know, locking an entire game behind an overpriced special edition and charging a ton of money for multiple season passes on top of that. But still, just when I thought things were starting to get better, Atlus goes and does this crap with Soul Hackers 2. You may be wondering where this whole practice started, and most people would probably say Persona 5, but I actually think it started with Shin Megami Tensei 4. Not counting the pre-order bonuses, Shin Megami Tensei 4 had DLC that totaled just over $25, and most of it was either just dumb armor pieces or challenge quests that gave you armor pieces, and the obligatory grinding DLC. But you also had boss battles like the ones against Sanat, Ancient of Days, Masakado, and the Archangels, some of which actually explain things that weren't explained very well in the base game's story. Nobody thought much of it at the time, but looking back, yeah, this is kind of scummy, especially for a 3DS game in 2013. The rest of the 3DS games would continue this trend with varying degrees of greediness, but another thing I should mention is that unlike most 3DS and Vita games that launched at only $40, most of Atlus's games for these platforms launched at $50, something that would come to be known as Atlus tax. It started with Shin Megami Tensei 4 and would continue all the way up until Strange Journey Redux, and I imagine they stopped with that because it really would have been something else if they had charged extra for a remaster of a game they couldn't even bother to give an English dub. And speaking of overpriced, I don't actually know how much Atlus had to do with this, but I think it's at least worth mentioning. You all remember Persona 5 the animation, right? Yeah, neither did I until I started working on this video, but in 2020 it actually got an English dub along with a Blu-ray release. And I just want you to guess how much it costs. Just pause the video, take a few seconds to guess. $60? No. $80? No. $100? No. You're getting warmer though. 120? Still no. 150? No. 200? No! If you want Persona 5 the animation on Blu-ray, it's gonna cost you $400. Oh, wait, sorry, it's actually $300 because it's technically being sold at a discount, but yeah. $300 for an anime that pretty much only exists to make Persona 5 accessible to people who just cannot stand playing video games and doesn't even cover the entirety of the game. For $300, you could probably buy a PS4 from a secondhand shop along with Persona 5 Royal and still have some money left over. Again, I don't actually know how much Atlus had to do with this, but either way, it's so ridiculous, it's almost laughable. Now, I made this video because I wanted to talk about Atlus's anti-consumer practices, but I'm not doing this because I have some kind of vendetta. I'm doing this because Atlus is my favorite developer and publisher, and I don't want to see them go down the same path that so many other companies that have made and published my favorite games have gone. And I don't want anyone to boycott Atlus or Soul Hackers 2 either. I've already got the collector's edition of Soul Hackers 2 pre-ordered for Xbox One, even though I do think this collector's edition was kind of pricey, but either way, I'm not going to be spending any money on this DLC, at least not until it's on sale, and I encourage you to do the same. And, you know, Atlus has also done a lot of pro-consumer practices too in the last few years. For one thing, they released Persona 4 Golden on Steam. This was an absolutely out-of-nowhere announcement that took the entire PC gaming community by storm, and it was great. They took one of their most popular games, one that was stuck on the not-so-popular PlayStation Vita, and put it on PC, where it's accessible to just about everyone, and with no Day 1 DLC. The same goes for the PC ports of Strikers, Nocturne HD, Persona 4 Arena Ultimax, and Soul Hackers 2. Making the games more easily accessible is always good, not to mention Soul Hackers 2 is coming to Xbox as well. For Nocturne HD, they still did patch selectable skills and fusion in. It wasn't until later after fan backlash, but they could have just left it as is, but they didn't. And as scummy as the DLC for both Persona 5 and Royal were, they did make all the DLC for the original Persona 5 free with Royal, whether you bought the original DLC or not. And don't forget, Shin Megami Tensei 5 got a worldwide release, and it's happening again with Soul Hackers 2. After years of having to wait over half a year for games with not the best localizations, getting worldwide releases is more than welcome, and will probably be standard from here on out. And not to mention, starting with Persona 5 Royal, Atlus has been adding even more language options, which is great for non-English speakers. While Atlus has come a long way and we're definitely in a better spot than we were 3 years ago, the fact that Atlus is still doing this egregious Day 1 DLC nonsense for Soul Hackers 2 makes me lose a lot of hope, and this is still a lot worse than anything they've done since the release of Royal. Either way, this sort of thing needs to stop completely. Do not strip content from the game, and do not charge this much for it. And while I encourage you guys to support this game, do not support this DLC. Anyways, guys, that is going to be it for the video. As usual, be sure to rate, comment, and subscribe. Be sure to check out my other links in the description. If you want to support me financially, consider leaving a Ko-Fi donation. And until the next video, I will see you guys later.